Welcome to Cora's Cottage, where things are homegrown and handmade. I started my journey in town on a small city lot where I grew a garden and preserved most of what I grew. While I was in town, I continued to learn kitchen and other homemaking skills. However, recently, my husband and I have had the opportunity to move out into the country. This means we have more space, and I will be expanding my garden and preservation skills this summer. I want to continue to expand my homesteading and homemaking skills as well. Follow along with me on this journey as I share what I learn. About 3 years ago, I started shredding my own cheese after I got more conscious about what was on my ingredient labels. One of the things I started looking at was shredded cheese. If you've ever looked at the bag of shredded cheese, you often see a white powder that helps to keep the cheese from sticking together. I was curious what this was and started doing some research on the different things on the ingredients label of shredded cheese. And I learned that this white powder was called cellulose and is often derived from wood pulp. When it's derived from wood pulp, the wood pulp is cooked in a chemical bath, then washed and possibly even bleached depending on the company, and then treated with an acid and dried to be ground into a powder that then makes its way into our cheese. The FDA and industry both claim that none of the chemical makes it into the final product because of the washing process. I'm not sure I entirely believe this because there have actually been no studies proving that the amount is negligible and has no effects over the long term. In fact, I can find no studies at all that they have done to ensure that it is safe. They just assume that it is because it's such a small amount. When it's something we're consuming, I think that is a backwards way to look at it. Some of the chemicals that are used include sodium hydroxide or lye. This can cause burns, corneal damage, and blindness when it comes in contact with the skin and the eyes. When inhaled, it can irritate and burn the respiratory tissues, and when ingested, it can cause burns of the mouth, throat, and stomach. Now, all of the studies that show this are in larger quantities of the sodium hydroxide or lye, but we don't know over the long term what the effects can be, even when it's considered to be a negligible amount. Sodium sulfide is also a chemical that is used, and it is corrosive and has the potential to release hydrogen sulfide gas, which is a toxic byproduct that is often released in the making of the powder. When it comes in contact with the skin and the eyes, it can cause burns and irritation. When it's inhaled, it can cause dizziness, nausea, and even cause a person to pass out. And when it's ingested, it can cause gastrointestinal burns and systemic toxicity, and over the long term, it can even cause death. Now, these are with larger amounts that they have studied this on, such as people working in the factories with it every day. However, if it can cause that large of reactions in those people, even negligible amounts over the long term in our food are concerning to me. So this is why I choose to shred my own cheese at home, especially since getting a KitchenAid with the shredder attachment. However, I did start shredding my cheese before I had this attachment, and yes, it was a lot more work, but if I just took a day and shredded cheese, it was well worth it because I would often have cheese for upwards of a month. After I shred the cheese, I bag it in portions of 1 cup to 2 cups and put it in the freezer. I can pull it out whenever I need it, and it thaws rather quickly in the shredded form. Now, I'm not saying that I never use pre-shredded cheese from the store. I just do my best to avoid it since we really don't truly know the safety of the cellulose despite what the industry and the FDA is telling us. To me, it would be better to do the studies to prove it's safe before it is allowed into our food products than to assume that it's a negligible amount and has no effects. Another reason that I don't mind shredding my own cheese is because we don't care if the cheese sticks together in clumps, which is the only reason to add the cellulose to the store-bought cheese. It keeps the cheese from clumping together and makes it more visually appealing for the consumer. When I do a big cheese shredding day, I usually buy 1 to 2 blocks of each type of cheese that I need. So this particular day, I bought 2 6-pound blocks of mozzarella cheese and 2 5-pound blocks of smoked cheddar cheese. So I went ahead and shredded all 22 pounds of cheese in one day in just an afternoon. It only took me about an hour and a half to shred and package all of that cheese and get it in the freezer, and that included some interruptions from my toddler. So this isn't an overly time-consuming thing, considering that cheese will last us for probably close to 2 to 3 months. When I'm ready to start shredding cheese, I take each block and I cut it into 16 pieces. So I'll cut down my 8 pieces and then cut each of those in half. You can kind of see about the size they end up being on the cutting board there. I cut them down to this size because that's what fits into my cheese shredder really nicely. You might have to cut them smaller depending on what cheese shredder you have, or if you're doing it by hand if you want more cheese to hold on to as you're shredding. Then it's time to just stand there and take my time as I shred each of the blocks until I have all of one type of cheese shredded into my large bowl. Occasionally, I'll have to stop the shredder so that I can clean it out, as cheese will get stuck, but this is pretty rare with this KitchenAid attachment. It's probably one of my favorite items in my kitchen because it does save me so much time. If you have a KitchenAid but you don't have this shredder attachment, it is so useful if you want to start shredding your own cheese or your own vegetables. I use it to shred my zucchini and to make hash browns. It's just beyond useful in my kitchen, and I highly recommend one for anyone who already has a KitchenAid. Once I have all of the cheese of a particular kind shredded, it's time to go ahead and clean out the attachment and then start portioning out the cheese. This is mozzarella, and I'm going to portion it out in 2-cup increments. I'll do the same with the cheddar cheese that I'll do later. So I just use small little baggies to do this as of now. I haven't found a better, more sustainable, reusable way to do this, so if you have any ideas, please drop them below in the comments. And then I'll just twist tie them off and put them into a freezer bag, usually a 2-gallon freezer bag, to store in the freezer that I'll just label which type of cheese it is. Then when I need cheese, I just run down to the freezer, grab however much I need, knowing that I have 2-cup increments, and it's usually thawed within an hour or 2 if I leave it on the counter, or within 6 if I put it in the fridge. So this means that I can completely forget that we need cheese and have cheese pretty quickly. The type of cheese does matter for how quickly it thaws out. Parmesan thaws quickly, mozzarella not as fast. I have stored this shredded cheese in the freezer for up to 6 months. It usually doesn't last my family that long, but it's still usable at that point. The other thing I will say about shredding your own cheese is it melts better than the store-bought. There's something about that cellulose powder that causes the cheese to not melt as well, and studies have found this to be true. So if you're worried about how melted your cheese is going to be for things like pizzas or to top casseroles, you're better off using your own shredded cheese for those types of things. Now, if you don't have the time or the capacity to shred a whole bunch of cheese at one point like this and store it for later, you can always shred your cheese as you need it, buying smaller blocks and just shredding as you go. I have done this in the past for cheeses that I don't tend to keep on hand, such as a yellow cheddar or a Swiss. For each 6-pound block of mozzarella, I can fill approximately 1 2-gallon freezer bag full of these 2-cup increment baggies. I make sure to label the 2-gallon freezer bag with mozzarella cheese, 2 cups, so that I know exactly what the increments are. I don't usually worry about a date because I have a good rotation going in my freezer, so I know which cheese is the oldest and which is the newest. And like I said, my family goes through this fairly quickly, and I've kept it for up to 6 months, but we'll go through this amount of cheese in closer to 2 to 3 months. Then it's time to go ahead and package these up in that 2-gallon freezer bag. I want to pack these fairly loosely because I found over time that the tighter they're packed, the more they will clump. And mozzarella is one of the cheeses that naturally tends to clump a little more. However, if it does clump, it's not that big of a deal because while it's less visually appealing sitting in the bag, when you take it out to use it in recipes, you can easily break the clumps apart so that it will perform exactly the same in a recipe as a truly fresh shredded cheese. Frozen veggies are another item that I buy in bulk when I need to buy them. We try really hard to have enough veggies from the garden, but last year I had very limited garden space in town, so we've already run out of green beans and corn. So it was time to go ahead and get those restocked. Now I buy them frozen instead of in cans for a couple different reasons. One is BPAs. These are in the epoxy resin lining of a metal can, and they help prevent corrosion and contamination, which is great except for that BPAs can often migrate to food, and they're endocrine disruptors that can potentially affect hormone balance, reproduction, and increase the risk of chronic disease. There are companies that do not line their cans with BPA, but they can be very difficult to find, and I find it just as easy to buy large quantities of frozen vegetables and repackage them myself. Another thing that I'm a little bit worried about with canned vegetables are tin or aluminum metal contamination from the can that could leach into the food, or it can even be in the coating sometimes. High exposure to these items can cause gastrointestinal issues or even neurological effects, and we can be exposed to tin and aluminum in so many different areas of our lives. It's just easier to avoid the can, especially since I can get frozen and repackage it myself so easily. There can also be other preservatives such as sodium benzoate, ascorbic acid, or calcium chloride. A lot of these are just added for texture and color, which I don't really care as much about and aren't really an issue with frozen vegetables. So here I am divvying out my green beans into quart bags. I'll do 4 cups into each quart bag. That'll come out pretty even here. I bought 5 pounds of frozen green beans, and I will get approximately 5 to 6 bags of those green beans. I put all of my vegetables straight into a freezer bag so that I can just set them on the freezer shelf, especially these ones this time of year, because these are just to supplement us until the garden starts producing. So I just had to replant my beans because they rotted in the ground, because right after I planted them, we got a cold spell and a whole bunch of rain. Always thankful for the rain, but the timing was kind of bad for my garden, and so I only had about 20 green bean plants come out of 200 feet. Those definitely needed to be replanted. So we have a while until we'll get green beans, since I just put those in the ground, so these will hopefully tide us over until we get to that point. That's actually where I'm at with most of our garden veggies. We're completely out of corn, carrots, green beans, and peas at this point. I haven't grown peas in the past, but hoping to in the future. But the rest of those, I usually grow more than enough for what we need in a year, so we're just trying to supplement since we ran out. I will label each of these bags with what's in it, so in this case green beans, and the month and the year that it was packaged. I'm not at all concerned that these vegetables are going to still be in the freezer when they're freezer burned. I think we'll go through them much faster than that, but this way I know exactly how old they are and which ones need used first in case I have to do a restock before we will be getting our own green beans fresh from the garden. Up next, it was time to go ahead and get my corn packaged up. I again ordered 5 pounds of corn just to tide us through until the sweet corn is ready for harvest and to start putting in the freezer. In the past, I've packaged my sweet corn in 2-cup increments, but that just isn't enough, and I've been grabbing 2 packages whenever I make meals. So I'm gonna go ahead and package these in 4-cup increments, just like I did the green beans. The one downfall I will say to buying vegetables in bulk when they're frozen is that oftentimes they're stuck together like you saw, and you have to beat them apart, which is fine when they're in smaller increments like these 5-pound bags of green beans and corn. But the peas can be a little bit trickier when they're in larger increments. I believe I bought 20 pounds of peas this last time, and they were a lot harder to get broken apart. So that is one challenge, but it's a minor one, especially if you can leave it in the bag and bang it on the counter like you saw me do there previously. I do make sure that I label these freezer Ziploc bags with corn and then the month and the year, just like I did with those green beans. So corn, and then it says 6/25 since I'm packaging these up in June. And finally, time to go ahead and get the peas packaged. So I bought, I believe this is 20 pounds of peas, considerably more peas than corn and green beans, because I do not have any peas planted this year, despite wanting to grow some in the near future, hopefully next year or maybe even this fall. I don't have any in the ground now, so I know it's going to be a while before I have any to harvest from the garden, and I'm sure we'll get through these by that time, and I'll probably have to order some more even. So these are going to get packaged in 4-cup increments, just like the corn and the green beans. That seems to be about the perfect size for our family. And I label these bags just like I do for the corn and the green beans with peas and then the month and the year. These, it's a little more important that I get that date just because there are so many of them and I will probably be ordering more of these, but I'm not too concerned still because, like I said, we go through veggies quite frequently. I try to feed veggies with almost every meal, which means that we'll go through a lot of these a lot faster than I probably am thinking, but I'm hoping that this will tide us over until our garden vegetables are ready to be harvested. Once all of the vegetables are packaged up, it's time to go get them into the freezer. Now, this is always a little bit of a fun experiment because depending on how much food is in our freezers, it can be a bit of a challenge to get everything tucked away because I like to buy things in bulk so that I'm not having to buy things constantly at the grocery store and instead can do a big splurge event where I get a whole bunch, package it up, and it's in the freezer, and then I know I have food to go grab for quick meals, especially in the summertime. I love to spend time out in the garden. That's where I would much rather be than the kitchen. So it's important that I have a lot of these things ready to go. And vegetables are quick and easy to add to any meal. They usually take less than 15 minutes to get ready and on the table. So they are perfect.